Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to or back to my channel. If you've never seen me before, hey, my name's Cora. If you have seen me before, then welcome back. Thanks for coming back for another video. Today we're going back to my roots and we're going to talk about psychology. And not just anything in psychology, we're going to talk about ADHD. I want this to look baggy, very Billie Eilish-esque. Unfortunately, I look a little bit like a football player. I'm getting ready to go stunt on the field. I was diagnosed with ADHD as soon as I graduated high school. So I basically graduated in May and I got the diagnosis later that month. This was unfortunate for a lot of reasons, mostly because I really struggled throughout high school with ADHD symptoms that I didn't know were ADHD. ADHD is severely underdiagnosed in women. This is due to a couple different things, but one of them is because it's a little more nuanced in women than it is in men. And I want to explain some of the symptoms and go into depth of what it really is, because it's more than just a quirky little personality trait. It can be debilitating in certain situations and with certain different personalities. I'm just gonna dive into my experience with ADHD, what it was like getting diagnosed, what symptoms were present in me or can be present. My experience getting diagnosed was very different than my brother's experience. And I'm gonna just mention his story a little bit. I'm not gonna go into depth because that's not my story. But my brother got diagnosed when he was 5. The way that it came to be was that he was going to therapy for behaviors he was exhibiting, basically. And in therapy, the therapist was like, I think your son has ADHD. He had to go out to a testing center. They asked him a lot of questions. It was very long. It's like a test, basically. He was diagnosed with ADHD. His experience was a lot more rigorous than mine was. My process was a lot easier. That could just be because at the time of my diagnosis, I had a great relationship with my psychiatrist. She'd seen me since I was 15, so I'd been with her for 3 or 4 years. It just sort of hit me. It's the same as when I was diagnosed with OCD. I just knew that I had this problem before I even really knew what it was. I did a lot of research and it does run in my family as well, so that could have been a huge sign to me. Since it's more nuanced in women, a lot of these symptoms that I'm gonna go over, I really didn't realize were ADHD. I often felt like I was dumb or stupid or ditzy. It made me just think that I'm just not as smart as everyone else. When you're young and you're developing your self-esteem and you're developing your personality and who you want to be, it can be very hard to put your emotions aside and see that this is a symptom of a larger issue. They essentially, to diagnose me, gave me a questionnaire and my mom and dad a questionnaire. At this time, my parents were separated, so I was living with my mom. So she filled it out pretty accurately. My dad, I was not seeing super often. He didn't really know what was going on. I remember one of the questions was doing well with grades, and I was not doing well with grades. I barely graduated high school. That's a whole nother story in and of itself. I did barely graduate high school. That was a whole issue just due to the fact that I was in an inpatient program, or an outpatient hospitalization program. Moving on into some of the symptoms I was experiencing, inattentiveness was a huge one. Inability to concentrate and hold focus was a really large one that I didn't quite realize until recently. Jumping from topic to topic and task to task, which I still do if I'm not medicated. For a while I didn't have insurance, so I have just been raw dogging life without medication. So often I find myself skipping from one thing to another and I'm never finishing anything. It's not like I'm finishing one task and then moving on to the next. It's I'm just jumping all over the place. Extreme sensitivity, and that's actually something I'm going to go more into depth a little later. Inability to take criticism, that's something I still struggle with. I'll touch on that later. Forgetfulness was a huge one. I don't really know what it is, but I could have a conversation with someone and they could tell me X, Y, and Z. And then if someone asks me what they told me, especially with data or details, it's very hard for me to remember it accurately. And that is something I'm working on. So shortly after I was diagnosed, we started trying out different medications. And obviously Adderall is a huge medication. It's what most people I think gravitate towards. Obviously you don't want to start off the bat with that. So I tried Ritalin, Focalin, Concerta, Vyvanse. All of those were a similar situation where it was I was if it's doing something, I don't really know. I don't notice anything. It was a couple years that I was trying these different medications out. When you're struggling with other mental illnesses, it's not as easy as just throwing an ADHD medication on it. You want to make sure that the medication you pick works well with everything else that you're already taking. But my brother was taking Adderall, my mom was taking Adderall, and she gave me one time. When I tell you that I cleaned my entire room in 30 minutes, I could not believe it. I literally was what is this magic? I'm actually able to focus on things without every other thought popping into my head and then remembering, oh, I was supposed to text so-and-so, and oh, I need to email back blah-de-blah, and you know what I mean? There's just constantly when I'm not medicated, just thoughts all the time that are diverting my attention. It's just insane. So now I just kind of want to talk about what this diagnosis meant to me. It's not as like impactful as maybe like you could say bipolar disorder or any personality disorder, but it was very impactful for me, and the reason was because I really struggled with my self-esteem in middle school specifically, but also high school. I always felt like I was being told I'm like the ditzy friend, I'm spacey. At that time, I was really struggling with major depressive disorder as well as OCD and generalized anxiety. So it was just kind of a lot. I think when you're struggling with those mental illnesses, you're very vulnerable and you're very emotional. It's just kind of like your raw emotions, and I'm a very emotional person, especially when I wasn't on a medication that was properly treating those mental illnesses. These thoughts I had about myself affected my self-esteem growing up and ultimately started to feed into the depression that I began experiencing. And when you're struggling with depression, like, things don't seem right. Everything feels like it's like upside down. People do shit and you feel betrayed, you feel so upset, you feel alone. And a lot of those feelings, it's just a cycle and it just keeps going. This diagnosis helped me accept those traits about myself, and it also helped me understand why I am the way that I am. I think it was very validating for me. I think a lot of those traits about myself I've kind of rejected and I've kind of not accepted. I think when you accept yourself for the way you are, it's very comforting. I do kind of wish that I had this diagnosis in high school. I would have done a lot better in school because I didn't do too bad, but as soon as I started struggling with my mental health and then my physical health with my type 1 diabetes, it was just a disaster. I felt like instead of putting my best foot forward and trying to achieve the best things I could in high school, it was more so like I was just trying to get by. I was just trying to like make it through the next day. It seems like a very dramatic thing to say, but if you've been in that place, if you've been in that low vibration before, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So going back to the extreme sensitivity, this is something that kind of sparked me wanting to talk about this. I was speaking with some of my friends. We were talking about ADHD and talking about extreme sensitivity with that. I had kind of researched this because I had convinced myself that I had like a personality disorder, that I had bipolar disorder, or that I had borderline personality disorder. I was researching all of the symptoms and trying to diagnose myself because I was like, there is something wrong with me. I am way too sensitive. I am way too emotional, and like I just can't, I need to figure it out. I think a lot of those symptoms were due to ADHD that I wasn't diagnosed with yet. I started researching extreme sensitivity in relations to ADHD a couple years ago because I was really struggling. I felt very emotional and overly sensitive to things. It was just very hard for me to control my intense feelings and my hypersensitive thoughts. I was often told that I was overly sensitive in relationships, mostly relationships, but also in friendships. And that made me really think like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I also just felt like it was like something was off. Like I was just like, I don't think other people are struggling this much with their emotions. I learned that this is a symptom of ADHD and it's not as talked about. And on top of all of that, I am also a highly sensitive person. You might be like, no shit, that's what you've been saying this entire time. But that is an actual personality. I don't even know what they classify it as. It's not a diagnosable illness, and it's thought to be more of a hereditary trait. So that's great. So highly sensitive people, or HSPs, are thought to make up about 15 to 20% of our population. Being a highly sensitive person, I don't even know how to describe it. It sounds so stupid, but it was so validating because I was like, wow, like this is literally me. My therapist was actually the one that told me this just based off of what he was hearing from me. And I kind of looked more into it and I did more research once I got that like diagnosis from him. Being a highly sensitive person, like I could totally make another video on that if that's like interesting to people. I just feel like it's such a like niche topic. If you guys relate, please let me know, drop a comment, because I feel like I'm one of the only people I know that's like a highly sensitive person. I don't know where all the rest of y'all are, but moving into rejection sensitivity. Within ADHD, I wanted to talk about this. This is kind of like what my friends and I were talking about. It's a condition that causes people to experience extreme emotional pain when they experience rejection or feelings of failure. This is something that I have assimilated with basically my entire life. As a child growing up, I was very sensitive. I was just an anxious individual in the sense that things would happen and they would overstimulate me and it would make me really anxious. No one cares, but let me just say this real quick. There was one time my whole family got the stomach flu. Me and my brother were good, but my mom was really sick. At one point, she was like, you need to call an ambulance, like I need to go to the hospital. And she was in a way I'd never seen her before at that point, and it was really, really scary to me. I think I was 10. Shortly after that, I had just been diagnosed with diabetes. I'm doing injections. We had McDonald's, and my dad was like watching over us because I guess my mom was only the one that was like really sick. I gave myself insulin, and after that whole thing with my mom, I literally could not eat it. I was like, I'm gonna throw up. Long story short, I developed the stomach flu from that. I don't know how. I don't know if maybe it was just like was my turn, but it was really traumatic because I needed to make up all of those carbs that I had given myself insulin for, especially like McDonald's is like carb heavy. For whatever reason, it was really traumatizing for me. That just kind of goes to show how sensitive I was at that time. Rejection sensitivity is commonly paired with ADHD, and studies suggest that 98% of adults with ADHD clinically experience RSD. RSD sounds like a goddamn STI. And this can be because some individuals with ADHD struggle with their emotional responses to stimuli. And I've never related to a sentence more than that. It's literally only 3, but this whole winter shit is pissing me off. People with rejection sensitivity disorder may feel emotions more intensely, they might people please, they might withdraw and abandon their goals for fear of failure. And it can sound crazy, but it really does affect my life. I might need to return this. I'm not sure how I'm feeling about it. I did a little bit of research. 3.5% of the population is estimated to have ADHD. And I don't know why I thought it was like way more. I feel like everyone I talk to is like, oh yeah, I have ADHD. I have ADHD. Having a diagnosis allows me to use medications that help me effectively manage these symptoms I experience. And if you can relate to any part of this, there's a possibility that you might have ADHD. My experience being diagnosed was very life-changing, and it can be for you too. A lot of these mental illnesses like major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety, a lot of them are comorbid with other mental illnesses. I've kind of found that to be true in my life at least. It's not easy dealing with these symptoms I've talked about, and it's not like a chronic illness where it's debilitating in the same way. It's just debilitating in a mental like mind fuck. If you feel like you relate to this, I would suggest reaching out to your primary care doctor first. If you don't have a psychiatrist, they might recommend someone to you. If you don't have a psychiatrist, but you are experiencing these feelings, I think what kind of validates that is if you take like an online ADHD test, like do I have ADHD? Obviously, they're not all legitimate, but I can link some down below that are actually based upon research. And that's not a diagnosis. I am not a doctor by any means, but I will say they do really help you highlight kind of like the areas in your life where there are possible issues. I will say it is tough if you don't have insurance. Psychiatry appointments are expensive. I was without insurance for like the past year or so, and that was really hard. I mean, especially managing like my diabetes, it's just a goddamn disaster. But especially mental illness, it's just all pushed to the side because it was like, you can't do anything, you don't have insurance. There was a period of like 5 months where I was not taking any medication for ADHD, and it was hard. It was definitely an adjustment. I really do recommend though, if you can relate to the symptoms or experiences I've talked about in this video, there's no harm in asking, there's no harm in checking. Talk with someone else, talk with someone that knows you. I feel like I could talk about this for so long, and I do just want to touch back on this sensitivity, the extreme sensitivity. If that is you, if you can relate to what I'm saying, I promise you it does get better. Things just get easier as you get older, and it's kind of controversial because some things don't get easier, but in terms of like managing my emotions, I've really learned that being on the right medication for my major depressive disorder is very key, as well as on medication for my anxiety. I'm a very anxious person, like just naturally, but I never felt like that was my real personality. Like I think I'm a very laid back person, but due to ADHD I wasn't really able to be that laid back personality that I assimilate with more. If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to leave a comment, say hey, talk about your story. You know, we all have a different story, we all come from a different walk of life, you know, but at the end of the day we can relate in the sense that these mental illnesses that we experience affect all of us. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe if you'd like to. You're welcome to follow me on Instagram as well, as I have my Pinterest linked, and I'll talk to y'all later. Mwah.